Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of Metaphysical Media. Today we are going to be talking about the New York Stock Exchange. But first, a few introductions. I have with me here my esteemed colleague, Stephen Frampton. Greetings, Stephen. How are you?
I'm doing extremely well, thank you, Stephen. I'm really looking forward to this show about the New York Stock Exchange. Great subject.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. Before we get into it, would you like to tell everybody listening who you are, where you can be found, what it is that you do?
Absolutely. Well, I'm a psychic medium, which means that I enjoy helping people to connect with their loved ones in the spirit world. I think it's extremely healing to know that the soul continues to exist and evolve after the dissolution of the physical body. So that brings me a lot of joy. It's work that I very much am happy to do. But I'm also interested in metaphysics more broadly, Stephen, as you know.
Right.
I'm an astrologer, and I find astrology an absolutely wonderful way to understand myself, to help other people understand themselves, and to really understand the soul, the unconscious mind that creates all of the dynamics that occur in our lives. And I particularly enjoy looking at when things are most likely to occur. So prediction is a great passion of mine, as I know it is yours as well. And as you, I enjoy looking at world events and making predictions and trying to understand what on earth is going on in our crazy world.
Right. I mean, the astrology is the art of beginning well. You know, it's the study of beginnings because, you know, as a lot of us really intuit, the ending is wrapped up in the beginning, isn't it? When we're born, when we're embryonic, our nearsightedness is wrapped up in that beginning. You know, our disgusting hammer toes are wrapped up in that beginning. Our asthma, you know, our propensity towards sleepwalking, whatever, it's all wrapped up in that beginning. And astrology is a symbol system for judging that. And so tonight we're going to apply these techniques to the New York Stock Exchange. And I got to tell you, Steve, I am fortified on my mother's biscotti. My mom brought me some excellent biscotti today, and so I'm ready to jump into this. So New York Stock Exchange, let's go ahead and understand a couple of things about that. First of all, it has absolutely nothing to do with the government. You know, a lot of young people perhaps, or non-financially oriented people might think that the New York Stock Exchange has something, maybe it's perhaps an extension of the government, but it is not. It is a privately owned corporation. In fact, it is owned by a company called Intercontinental Exchange, which is itself traded on the New York Stock Exchange. Before that, the Intercontinental Exchange purchased the New York Stock Exchange, it merged with it, or, you know, whatever these big companies do. It bought it from a company called Euronext. Euro, emphasis on euro. So this is one thing, the international character of the New York Stock Exchange, that is going to be a big talking point for us tonight. A few other things about this. There are plenty of stock exchanges in the world. Even China, communist China, has two of them that are important. And the New York Stock Exchange, the one in Manhattan, is absolutely the biggest one in the world in terms of market capitalization of the companies that are on it. A daily trading value of $169 billion. So this is a huge, huge entity. It's always getting in trouble. It's always getting sued for fraud, for breach of contract, and so it's a startling legal personality, the New York Stock Exchange, and it has its fingers in the very innards and viscera of world affairs and world history. So let's go ahead and get into that chart. What do you say, Steve?
Well, there's a lot to say about this one, and I'm really pleased, Stephen, that you've made it clear that the NYSE is a privately owned entity. It's not a governmental entity.
Nope.
I think we so often presume that these huge entities are somehow associated with government and functioning for the benefit of human welfare, which is not necessarily the case. But it's like the Fed. You know, the Fed is not a governmental organization. It's a private organization. I have to say, the first thing that really caused my eyeballs to pop out when I looked at this one is that fascinating sun, the essence of the entity in the 10th house of the public domain,
right,
in Taurus. We'll discuss that, I'm sure, but at 27 degrees Taurus, smack bang in the Pleiades, possibly the most malefic area of the zodiac. That's the thing that struck me first. I raised my eyebrows and thought,
Me too, because that sun is exactly conjunct the degree of Caput Algol, which we actually had reason to discuss last week when we were talking about that jerk-off Gacy, you remember?
Yes, jerk-off, yes, I remember him.
It's very coincidental, is it not, that we have a resonance of Caput Algol here in this chart as well. So is the New York Stock Exchange, as a legal personality, a depraved serial killer? Far from it, but Caput Algol, this fixed star in the constellation Pleiades, it is determined toward things like strangulation and asphyxiation and having a stranglehold. And, you really, in emphasizing that the New York Stock Exchange has nothing to do with the federal government, I think it's important to point out that the federal government is, in fact, often reacting to the stock exchange, isn't it? The Securities and Exchange Commission was created in an attempt to deal with this entity represented by the chart we're looking at. And if those listening need to get their hands on this chart, I invite you to go to the Metaphysical Media Group fan page on Facebook in the study chart, in the photo albums, and you'll find the chart there. Now, that 10th house sun in Taurus, Taurus is a very conservative and, it's oriented towards material security. And so that the sun really paints the picture of what the New York Stock Exchange really is all about. Now, yes, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that it's fascinating that Mercury is so close to that sun. So there's a Mercury here conjunct the sun, and also in that challenging part of the zodiac near the Pleiades. So we've got this retrograde Mercury that's part of it as well. So the rule book, the communications, what's said, what's not said, is all absolutely involved in that sun at 27 degrees Taurus in the Pleiades, challenging.
Now, I want to point out to folks that the 10th house it corresponds roughly to the midday position of the sun. And in astrology, this is very important in describing what a person's or an entity's social interaction and social prestige is going to be like. Those who have the sun, at the noon hour, so to speak, at the top of the sky, these are people who are destined to have some social prominence. Now, let me ask you about that retrograde Mercury, Steve. What are some of your, opinions about how that retrograde Mercury could manifest in the New York Stock Exchange's behavior? What do you think of when you think of that retrograde Mercury in Taurus, afflicted by its combustion, by its proximity to the sun?
Well, I think that we have to say as well that it's squaring Pluto. So Pluto was in Uranus back then in 1792 when this entity was created, and it really is an entity in its own right. It's a living, functioning entity that has enormous impacts upon the world, obviously, but that extremely tight, that exact square from Mercury retrograde to Pluto is something that I feel is very challenging, because having Pluto, the planet that rules the underworld, etc., that's so much associated with crime as well, it's implicitly involved in that Mercury, this organization's way of thinking.
Yeah.
So that's something that really struck me, Stephen. This is an entity, it's an awesome entity, and I don't mean that as a compliment. It's awesome, it's fascinating, it's awesome in terms of its size, its might, its impact upon the world, but that very exact square between Pluto and Mercury is suspicious in my mind. But I think that the sun aside, it's important to point out that sun also rules the ascendant, because the ascendant's in Leo, so its personality as well as its essence are ruled by that sun at 27 degrees Taurus. And I was fascinated as well by the very tight opposition between Saturn and Neptune. So you've got Saturn in Aries right there at the midheaven, an exact opposition or 1 degree out to Neptune. So I'd say it's structures, how can I describe it? Its structure, its ethics are very much wrapped up in that Neptune, and Neptune makes the business, Saturn, odd, confusing, mysterious, difficult to understand, difficult to decipher. And that's a very powerful opposition and dynamic in the chart. And sadly, it's that Neptune that is also retrograde that rules the 8th house in the chart.
Yeah. Now, you know what? That when I see this Neptune opposition to Saturn, and considering the idea that Jupiter is also involved in this opposition as well, you know what springs to my mind immediately? Bull versus bear market. Liberality versus caution. Now, you know, looking at the liberal phase of this, the optimism, the bull market side of things, we can see that it's totally illusory, that it's totally diluted by this Jupiter being retrograde and being conjunct Neptune. This to my mind speaks of an optimism that might often be unrealistic and not founded in reality, but the square between Mercury and Pluto that we were talking about before. Now, if you guys want to visualize this in your head, imagine a big L, okay? And at the top of the L is Mercury, and at the right-hand side is Pluto. And what this represents to me is a talent, a penchant for investigation. Do you see? But the Mercury is retrograde. That's the problem with the Mercury. It is absolutely retrograde. For investigations done by those board members, those in charge of this entity that is the New York Stock Exchange, I think maybe their ability to investigate things, I think that ability might be flawed.
Yes, but I think as well, it was a business partner. So if you, Stephen, were my advisor, my astrologer, and I said to you, "Oh, I'm thinking of going into business with this person," I'm sure that you would say, "I would be very careful about the way this person thinks,
right?
What they say, and I wouldn't necessarily trust what they say." Because you've got this very, very powerful square from Pluto to Mercury. So it indicates a need to be very cautious in terms of taking things at face value when this entity speaks or wants to contract.
Yeah. I would totally agree on that score right there. So, I mean, you know, I think us as human beings who might invest or who might send our funds to the New York Stock Exchange, I think we really need to take all of this into account. Now, pretty soon we'll get into perhaps how this thing is going to behave in the future. We'll have some very interesting comments about that. But I tell you what, why don't we look at the axis of the second and the 8th house, because I think this relates to the 8th house being my money and your money and everybody else's money that goes into this thing versus the second house, which is the money that that the owners of the stock exchange are going to pocket. Okay, and I would imagine that they make their money, a lot of it, by selling seats to this thing. And in other words, me and you, we can't just go up into the stock exchange floor and say, "Hey, I'd like to buy 600 shares of Apple or 600 shares of Google." No, you have to be a member of the exchange in order to do that. And the memberships for these things are prohibitively expensive. I mean, lineages, succession to royal crowns are easier to get at than memberships into the New York Stock Exchange. So there's something highly secretive about this. Now, if we look at the 8th house, we see that it's in Pisces. Jupiter rules Pisces, and Jupiter is in the third house in opposition to Saturn. Jupiter is this feeling of optimism, and this is, this characterizes the typical American investor when he goes to the stock market, especially throughout history. In America, you haven't really arrived until you have a portfolio. And so people invest emotionally, and those who run the stock exchange, they know this. They know that people invest emotionally. They look at the second house, which rules the stock exchange's finances. We have Mars in there, so Mars in Virgo is going to be, very, very aggressive about holding on to funds. You see, so the typical investor might not, might not be getting the full story from the New York Stock Exchange.
Yeah, and going back to that, you look at the chart, and if some of our listeners are looking at the chart and can understand that when they look at the top of the chart, at the cusp of the 10th house, they've got Saturn there, the brown glyph in Aries, which is the red, the ram's head, and it's in exact opposition to that Neptune, right opposite. Saturn is cold. It's a cold planet. It doesn't belong in a cardinal fire sign.
No.
And I often like to draw parallels between water and steam and ice when I think of how Saturn behaves in different parts of the chart. So it just doesn't belong there. It's cold. You've got a cold planet in a cardinal fire sign.
Yeah.
And that it has almost this dangerous potential. And
you
see, it's conjunct the moon, which is the common people. So it's almost as though those potentially dangerous but high risk, potentially huge gains of that Saturn in Aries are somehow involved with the common people, in that they don't necessarily benefit society as a whole. They do in some ways, but you've got those exciting potential gains and risks in business opposed by these very unbalanced disillusionments of Neptune. So I think that opposition with Jupiter and Neptune at one end and Saturn and the Moon at the other really explains that potential to make huge gains and make huge losses, and you win and I lose, or vice versa. Those big risks, the big stakes, this volatility.
Yeah.
And again, when you refer to the 8th house that's ruled by Pisces, that's interesting to explore, because the bottom end of that opposition is Jupiter and Neptune that rule Pisces. So the risks of it getting out of control, of it having major implications upon other people's finances, is described by that very powerful opposition between Saturn and Moon opposing Neptune and Jupiter. So I'm thinking, Stephen, of the catastrophic consequences of huge crashes caused by toxic mortgage loans and all of these dreadful products that were created that caused that horrible collapse in 2008. So it's that huge impact upon everybody else. The 8th house.
Yeah.
Whether you're in it or not, it's going to affect you.
I want to point out also that the current owners of the New York Stock Exchange, Intercontinental Exchange, what they're famous for being a clearinghouse of credit default swaps, which are a sort, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, I'm far from a financier. I do not have a degree in finance or anything like that. But a credit default swap, if I'm not mistaken, is sort of related to the derivatives market. It's a selling of bonds and loans and things. It's a selling of debt. Do you see? Where if the debt's defaulted on, then somebody profits, and if the debt is not defaulted on, then the other person profits. So at the heart, what we have in America, and I want to point out also that a lot of these debauched and immoral financial products and instruments, they have no test of time. They don't have they don't have a foundation in history. A lot of these financial instruments, they only came about in the 90s. Do you see what I mean? There was no such before the early 90s. There was no such thing as a credit default swap. Okay, and so these things are new. These very cunning and clever Mercury-esque types of convoluted financial investment vehicles. They're new, they're untested, and in my opinion, they're quite immoral. Now, looking at the moon in Aries, I don't know if you've ever known anyone who's had a moon in Aries, but they can be very impetuous, very impulsive, very temporary. And so when we consider the moon is already changeable in its nature just by its natural meanings, when we have the moon representing the people in Aries, what we have are people who are very impulsive in their investing behaviors. Now, which is sort of contradictory to, we would think that they would be more cautious. And indeed, with the sun being conjunct Mars, they will be cautious. But I'm sorry, with the sun being conjunct Saturn, I apologize.
The moon conjunct Saturn.
Thank you.
I know what you meant.
Yes, you know what I meant, man. I got some cerebral flatulence going on here, guys. Forgive me. I should have taken some Malax or something. Anyway, so we have the moon conjunct Saturn. So that's going to make this impulsive populace a little bit more cautious, but it's not their nature to be that way. The Saturn here is representing governmental agencies, governmental regulation, and things of that nature. It also represents some unwanted attention for the New York Stock Exchange as well. And Aries is very explosive. So there we have it. Saturn as a religious symbol. Jupiter represents Christians, Venus represents Islam, and Saturn represents Judaism. So we do have, if we can't avoid the religious implications of the New York Stock Exchange, because many of the members of the exchange, they have had buildings and like alternate offices located outside of the stock exchange for a long time because they kept getting bombed, not just by Islamic radicals, but also by conspiracy theorists and nuthatches that are right here domestically at home. And so I think all of this is shown by that backbiting, highly critical Saturn and Moon conjunct in Aries, an explosive type of energy, and I think that's fairly violent, and especially when you consider that the moon is in the 9th house of God, that Saturn, although conjunct the 10th house, is also associated with the 9th house of God. So we can know right off the bat that the New York Stock Exchange is going to offend people with religious sensibilities, certain types of people with religious sensibilities. But of course, these symbols are all doing double duty. The moon is a representation of the populace, but again, it's in opposition to Jupiter, and Jupiter is in the social sign of Libra. Libra is a one-on-one type of relationship, and so in my mind, for this matter, the Jupiter would represent like a broker, those who work on the floor of the stock exchange. Jupiter is below the horizon. Jupiter is on the inside. Jupiter is in the 3rd house, the house of routine actions and habits, and you see what I'm saying? Actions that you don't really think about that you have to do, like filling an order that you're paid to fill or what have you. And so Jupiter conjunct Neptune, to my mind, represents the quintessential or sort of the archetypal investment broker who might be affiliated with the New York Stock Exchange. For sure, if we look at the chart with the 4th house as being the entrance point for the funds, the 4th house is always the origin. You know what I mean? In my natal chart, your natal chart, the 4th house represents your DNA, represents your spiritual origins, the things that come from, well up from history and from inside you. And in a stock exchange, I would expect that to be where the orders come in. Does that make sense?
It does, for sure. It does. I was really struck by the nodal axis in this chart, Stephen, because it's at 0 degrees of cardinal signs. So for our listeners, we look at the nodal axis, which shows us the north node and the south node of the moon. It's a very important consideration when we look at any chart, any entity, because the north node shows us almost a point of integration. We should come over towards or evolve towards the north node, and the north node in this chart is in Libra, so sign of balance, of harmony, of relationships, equality. And the south node, which we consider to be very challenging, malefic, and the ancients called it the point of self-undoing, that south node is at 0 degrees Aries. I mean, anything that's in Aries is very initiating, fiery, because Aries is the cardinal fire sign. But 0 degrees, exactly 0 degrees, it says to me that when the collapse comes, it is catastrophic. The end is catastrophic. And the other thing that's very interesting about this chart is that the part of fortune, which generally describes where you feel comfortable and where you do well, you naturally do well, it's actually squared by the nodal axis. So it's what we call in the bends. So there's potentially a very sad end to the story of this entity, in my opinion.
Well, I think it'll be around long after you and I are dead. We're talking about something that was born in 1792. Now, I want to point out also that when the New York Stock Exchange was born, America as a country was by no means written in stone. We were a very young nation, and we would still have to prove ourselves because we would have another war coming up with Mother England, and Mother England would send her redcoats directly into Washington, and they would burn down the White House in the War of 1812, a war, incidentally, in which the Canadians actually handed our butts to us, which is very interesting. But at any rate, the stock exchange, the New York Stock Exchange, is very old, and it's going to be incredibly long-lived. It's going to, at least until, the collapse of our society, or until someone else buys it out and changes it. But we'll get into, what's going to happen to the New York Stock Exchange, here in a bit. What really strikes me about the nodal axis is that, especially having, it's being one end in Aries and another end in Libra, we have Venus and Mars pulling in, affecting this thing, dispositing this nodal axis, as it were. And, Mars in this chart, it's in Virgo. I'm not particularly convinced that Mars in Virgo is the best of placements. However, it is quite productive for the stock exchange, but perhaps not for the average investor. Mars is going to trine the Sun in Taurus, and it's going to really be on the Sun side. Now, who are we? Who are we, the investors? I'm sure we're going to be indicated by the 7th house cusp and the 9th degree of Aquarius. So that would give us Saturn and Uranus as significators. And so, just looking at how the stock exchange itself, it gets along with its investors, you see. You would think that there would be a sycophantic sort of relationship with the investors, but I'm not entirely convinced that that's the case. Pluto is in the 2nd house in Aquarius. All the air signs like Aquarius are oriented towards society and towards social equilibrium and things of that nature. And with Pluto there, we see that the people have the power over the New York Stock Exchange, but none of us really feel that way. If you listen to all the boob jobs and the conspiracy theorists and the paranoiacs, they're convinced, and I'm not, entirely sure that they're wrong. I think the conspiracy theorists, I think you could sum all the conspiracy theories up into a where there's smoke, there's fire sort of a situation. Mm-hmm. However, I don't think people really realize the power that we wield over the New York Stock Exchange as a collective, because the stock exchange itself has done a great deal to undermine our sense of control over this publicly traded entity. As far as Mr. Sprecher, who is the CEO of the Intercontinental Exchange, according to him, you know what I'm saying? It would be much better if everybody thinks that the New York Stock Exchange is an agency of the government. You know what I'm saying? That gives him the authority of Uncle Sam. Now, I would like to mention this about the nodal axis, because the New York Stock Exchange has a distinctly foreign and multinational sheen to it. And the South Node is in the 9th house of long distances and foreign lands, and the South Node being something that we should avoid. It's quite a clear indication to me that the globalist aspirations of the New York Stock Exchange are going to bode poorly for the financial health of this country as a whole. Individuals are going to enrich themselves off of other countries' investments, but having people like Deutsche Börse and other banks, European banks, other financial entities, having them controlling or engage in a relationship of control over the New York Stock Exchange. This is quite scary. This is quite scary. There's absolutely nothing stopping any foreign investment agency from, buying up shares of the ICE or whatever they're called, that acronym, the Intercontinental Exchange. So the New York Stock Exchange, by its very nature, invites foreign meddling into the very heart of the things that make this country powerful. This is not going to bode well in the long run for our economy.
Interestingly, I was looking at the elements in the chart, Stephen, and it's quite a discordant chart. It's not a highly evolved, harmonious chart. But when it comes to the elements of earth, fire, air, and water being sensitivity, emotion, etc., it has very little water. It's quite fascinating.
Yeah.
And when you think of the stock exchange, it doesn't really have any emotion or sensitivity about it, does it? It's just charging ahead, functioning, trying to make people money.
Yeah.
So I found that lack of sensitivity very interesting. And I also was just thinking of the moon in Aries. It's sort of like the moon being boiled in Aries.
Yeah.
Any sensitivity of the moon, the common people just boiling up there at 19 degrees in Aries. But there were other things that struck me, and that it's a very angular chart. So if you look at the power and the angular, the succedent and the cadent houses in the chart, it's actually almost 51% angular, 50.9%. It's almost like a fast-moving train. If you're on it, you're just stuck on it. It's just unstoppable. It's just a beast that you can't slow it down. It's so damned angular.
It is. And, I want to remind folks that, the water element isn't just about emotions. It's about domestic things, too. So as far as I'm concerned, the lack of emotional content in this chart, the lack of watery content in this chart, also represents a complete disregard for the American family. A complete disregard. In fact, if we look at the American family as being represented by the sign of Taurus, then I would say that the New York Stock Exchange regards the domestic unit of America as a possession. It's what I don't see it as really regarding. There's just no place for emotion in what the New York Stock Exchange does, and in a way, I suppose that makes sense. If your goal is to make money, then you don't want your judgment to be clouded by emotion. But by the same token, look at the opposition with Neptune and Saturn. That's not going to produce any sort of a clarity at all. So despite its lack of emotion and its avoidance of emotion, it's still susceptible to emotional mistakes, as shown by the opposition between Saturn and Neptune.
And it almost says to you, there's enormous gain to be had, there's enormous business to be done, but it doesn't necessarily benefit everybody. There's no sensitivity in it, and you'll never decipher what's actually going on anyway. Because of that opposition from Saturn and Neptune. But I found it interesting, Stephen, to look back. I mean, you and I were talking in our call before the show about the major collapses. So we had, and I wrote down the dating correctly for one of them, but we had Black Monday in 87, wasn't it? October 19th, 87.
Right.
And then we had Black Tuesday in 1929. And Black Friday in 1873. And then also we had the 9/11, the problems after 9/11, the huge losses after 9/11 because of that terrorist attack upon the World Trade Center. But I was looking at eclipses because although I work with progressions as you do, Stephen, and I know you use some ancient techniques and medieval techniques which are extremely fascinating and very, very revealing, but I'm interested in looking at the eclipse series and the impact the eclipses indicate or trigger. And actually, prior to all of these big crashes, these black days, Black Monday, Black Friday, Black Tuesday, there were eclipses, powerful, significant eclipses in sensitive points of the US chart, and then the collapse has actually occurred when transiting Saturn, the major malefic, moved in and either was conjunct or opposed the eclipse point. I think in 2 or 3 of the big cases, actually, Saturn had opposed the eclipse point. So in other words, in terms of looking at the market in future, looking at the New York Stock Exchange in future, we can monitor eclipses as we do in a client's chart. We'll say, well, is an eclipse falling on a very powerful point in the chart or a very significant planet, and what kind of eclipse is it? Is it a powerful eclipse? Is it a challenging eclipse? And when does it get triggered by a transiting planet? That's when you expect the shit to hit the fan, as it were, or the events to occur. So I found that very, very interesting.
It is interesting. I'd like to point out to people that when it comes to astrological forecasting, there are two families of techniques. There's the continuous techniques, continuous astrological techniques, where not a single moment of your life is unaccounted for. And this is the sort of technique that deals with planetary periods and things like that. And then there's the non-continuous prediction techniques, where you're using things like transits and progressions and profections to judge a specific, to judge what is going to trigger. And what you do is we use these things in a combination. And looking at the New York Stock Exchange's history from the viewpoint of continuous astrological forecasting, what I see here. Ooh, and I just struck my funny bone, and I can assure you guys I did not get that joke. It was not funny.
Ouch, ouch. Horrible when that happens.
Really, it was horrible. How did it ever become to be known as the funny bone? At any rate.
I know, but how fascinating that happened to you when we're talking about the New York Stock Exchange.
It is.
Because it is literally when the market, if you've got investments in the stock exchange and the market crashes, it really hurts. Hurts like hell, like that knocking the funny bone.
People commit
you think of all the people that lost their retirement.
Yeah.
And you think of the impacts upon when the market crashed in 2008 because of all those toxic loans. Think of the impacts even now. Young people that have graduated, that have completed their studies but can't find work and have moved back in with their parents. And the parents who can't necessarily retire on time because they still need to provide for the household. It's really, it causes huge shifts in the way we live our lives.
Yeah, it does. I know people personally, good people, hardworking people who've lost hundreds of thousands of dollars, who've lost their entire life. I mean, they've worked 40, 50 years to build it up, and they lost it. Now, there are some who'd say, that's their fault. Nobody put a gun to their head, and I don't agree with them. No, when these people are unsophisticated, and you're going to them with the cliche phrase is toxic financial product, and it's a cliche for a reason. It's the truth. You're going to this person who has the financial sophistication of Barney Fife, and you're saying, hey, buy this miracle product, when in fact it's just a bunch of crappy mortgages bundled up. You know what I mean? It's not that man's fault. This is a sin. This is a terrible thing. They ought to be ashamed of themselves. Now, I don't want to, hop on a soapbox here, but I want to talk about the Firdaria, the plan. I want to correlate.
Yes, I want to hear that. I want to hear that for sure.
I want to correlate some of the more troubling moments of the New York Stock Exchange's checkered past with the planetary periods that it went through. And in almost all cases, Saturn figures prominently in crashes. And in the crash, I want to say, 1873? That was during a Saturnian sub-period. During the biggest and the worst, or at least as far as history was concerned, crash, the 1929 stock market crash that launched the Great Depression, that was also in a Saturn sub-period. The entire Great Depression itself was during a Mars period that came just after that. And so we already have isolated two planets that whenever they show up in the Firdaria, I'm putting on my old shit hat, and that is Saturn and Mars. Whenever they show up in the Firdaria, there's going to be problems. There are going to be problems. And it happened again, I want to say, in October 19th, 1987. Let me just double check. 1987. Yeah. Also,
1987 Black Monday.
Right.
You see, I think that when we're working with these different tools within the astrology toolkit, whether we're looking at eclipses or we're looking at major progressed aspects or we're looking at the Fiderea, it's like looking at the same thing through a different lens.
It is.
And it's. I was describing it to my colleague Nancy the other day as it's like when you go and have your eyes tested and you wear the spectacles, but they take the lenses out and they go, "Can you see it now? Can you see it now? Can you see it now?" It's like looking through those different lenses, slightly different perspective. But what's really powerful, as you know, Stephen, is when we see through those different lenses, and at a point in time we're seeing the same theme, we're seeing the same signs. Pardon the pun. The same indicators, I should say. When we're seeing these same indicators using a different tool, we know that there's something significant on the right horizon, whether it's a great opportunity or a very significant problem. But I've got a question for you, Stephen, about Fiderea. When is the next? Because we're very interested in looking out to the future, and you and I have already said to our listeners that we're doing a lot of research work about the future, and that covers not just the stock exchange, but geopolitics, international relations, all manner of things. And we've got our eye on certain points in time that we know we want to analyze very deeply because we feel that they're troubling. So when you look at the New York Stock Exchange's chart and you consider the Fiderea, when do you mentioned Saturn, and the Fiderea involving Saturn correlating with significant market crashes, when do you see the next challenging combination?
Well, in the worst cases, and this makes a lot of sense. In the worst cases, what happens is the crashes usually come at the end of the Jupiter period. Now this is usually a 12-year period, and Jupiter, as we've already discussed, is an energy of optimism, liberality, and in the New York Stock Exchange chart, it's going to represent essentially a bull market. And so the 1929 stock market crash occurred at the very end of that 12-year long Jupiter period. It began in May 17th, 1918. And it lasted right on up until May 17th, 1930. So the 1929 crash occurred during the Saturn subperiod of the Jupiter Fyrdar. And so again, Jupiter is, in almost every case we see here, there's a period of expansion followed by something terrible. And in the stock market crash of 29, it was followed by a 7-year-long Mars period. Okay, and then that was followed by the nodes. Guess what? We're in an exact same pattern now. We're about to go into the nodal period, or may in fact even be in the nodal period of the Fiderea right now, which means that we're coming out of a Mars period, which is sort of a depression. We're recuperating from the financial misbehavior of 2007 or so, and even predating that. I mean, just because 2007, 2008, that's only when we became aware of the malfeasance that these assholes were getting up to. Okay, they were doing their junk way before then. Okay, and what happens is that Mars period is sort of going to be like an effort to recuperate. You see, Mars is in the second house of finances. Mars is naturally an energy of work and struggle and fighting. So it's struggling to recuperate, and that's what it's doing now. Now we're about to enter into a nodal period. Okay, it's going to be 5 years in length. And I expect that the first 3 years of that to be fairly good. And then I expect the final 2 years of that to be I expect it to be bad. The South Node is in the 9th house, so I expect some sort of foreign influence to cause problems on the market because of that. And it's going to last for 2 years. Now, after that, the New York Stock Exchange will enter into the period of the sun. And the sun is angular. It's at full strength. And I expect this to be a good period for the New York Stock Exchange. Now, I want to be very clear. Just because it's going to be a good period for the New York Stock Exchange does not mean it's going to be a good period for you and I.
Hey, Stephen, I was
Yeah.
just thinking, little disclaimer for anybody that listens to this, don't ever listen to an astrologer about investments or health or anything. Astrology is just nonsense. And always with your finances, speak to your financial advisor.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly not.
It's all nonsense anyway.
Right. Well, that's why so many people call me up and ask, "Hey, should I do this or should I buy this? Should I buy that?"
Including board members.
Right. And so, absolutely, it's not nonsense. This is a very powerful forecasting tool. Now, it's a good disclaimer, though. I am not licensed to be a financial advisor or a physician. I'm not going to say we're doing this for entertainment purposes. That's a lie. I'm an honest person, and I'm not doing this to entertain you, but I am doing it to educate. You know what I mean? Now,
what's the squeaking sound? Are you on a swing? Are you on a swing?
Yeah,
you sound like you're in the yard on a swing.
You know
you with your cell phone and your mic, your earphones.
I've got my grandfather's old rocking chair. He used to bounce on his knee on this thing when I was 5. But yeah, I did. I got so caught up I didn't even realize that I was rocking away in this thing.
I was looking at the progression, the major progressed aspects from the beginning of the entity's existence, and indeed, when you look at 1873 and you look at 1929, there are some very challenging progressions that peaked. And I was scrolling down my list to see what was going on in 1983. I'm just about to get to it, and sure enough, pretty horrible picture in terms of major progressed aspects around 82, 83, which is actually when that eclipse occurred, the eclipse that triggered Black Monday, or the eclipse that intensified the chart, that point in the chart that was so critical that got triggered in 1987 at the time of Black Monday. It's really interesting, isn't it?
It is, and it's been my findings also that a lot of the other forecasting techniques, they bolster the picture that's painted by the Fiordaria. And so this makes me a little bit more confident in understanding, how these dynamics are going to play out when they repeat themselves, because, this isn't, just because it's the New York Stock Exchange doesn't mean that it gets to sidestep cosmic law. As above, so below. And the New York Stock Exchange is just as susceptible to that occult maxim as are you and I. And so, I expect that once we get out of the nodal period, I would expect the exchange to perform fairly healthily. I would expect that to happen for a while until we reach perhaps the Venus or the Saturn sub-period in the solar period, because Venus also is going to be troubling as a symbol for what the stock market is going to do.
Yeah, and Stephen, when you take the New York Stock Exchange natal chart and then you create a tri-wheel with the progressed planets on the inner wheel, on the middle wheel, right, and the transiting planets on the outer wheel, that's extremely interesting to look at. And I was looking at that before the show, and I noticed that the north node of the moon in the NYSE chart has progressed and is now perfectly conjunct that Mars in the second house of finances. So I found that dynamic very interesting, because you've got the nodal axis,
right,
that's lined up perfectly with Mars. And Mars is the midheaven ruler as well. So it has an association with that powerful point in the chart, the midheaven, where Saturn also resides, the major malefic. And I was thinking, this is interesting. And then I noticed that the planet Uranus, which is in the first house of the NYSE chart in Leo, so it's fiery. Uranus is eccentric and unexpected. It's erratic. It's unpredictable. It's not for us. But generally, when people are living their lives and there's an event that involves Uranus, they don't see it coming.
No.
They don't, unless they're speaking with a good metaphysician that says, hey, there's something on the horizon here and Uranus is involved, so we need to think about what this could be. It's not something you're expecting. It's going to come suddenly, but particularly in the case of the New York Stock Exchange because it's in fire. But when you progress Uranus to say where does it sit in the chart at this point in time, it's in exact opposition to natal Pluto. But that is a very, very powerful, hugely powerful build-up and dynamic in this chart. But interestingly, I think you said in summary that you feel like the market will be okay for a number of years. Is that what you said?
Yeah. After we get out of the nodal period, right now we're in the north node period, and that's going to last for maybe 3 more years. And then after that will be the south node period. The south node period is 2 years long. It starts in about 3 years from now, and I would expect it to be a lot worse than the north node period. But this 2-year period of the south node is after that we're going to begin a 10-year long period of the sun, and for a while that's going to be great. That's going to be great until we get to some of the more troubling sub-periods. Venus is going to be a bad thing. Mars is going to be a bad thing. And, they both disposit or rule over, important planets like the sun and the moon. Sun is in Venus's sign. Moon, us, is in Aries. And, that's not going to be good. You know what I mean? And Mars, for example, last time, probably one of the worst Mars periods was the actual Great Depression of the 30s. And, I want to point out to you that during this time, we're also beating the drum for war. And not too long from now, towards the end of the Mars period and the beginning of the next one, World War II is going to happen. So this is also a testament to the power of the New York Stock Exchange because, it helped bring America out of the Great Depression, I suppose, to the manufacturing for the war effort. And it probably played a huge role in getting us involved in the war in the first place. I want to point out again that the Saturn in Aries, this is going to, I want to make people aware that those who run the New York Stock Exchange are always getting rejected by the government, not only American governments, but European governments, for trying to violate antitrust laws. They're constantly trying to monopolize stuff. Constantly. They will not stop. And this is Saturn. Saturn is their buddy. Saturn is right there on the cusp of the 10th house. And Saturn represents the idea that a lot of the investment banks that are involved in the stock exchange, that might even be traded on the stock exchange, they're also backing the company that runs the stock exchange. And so it's this big, huge, incestual cafe clutch.
Yeah, it's not good. I mean, even when you analyze the power of the planets in the chart, you see, that's Saturn in Aries, which is just an odd combination, but right at the midheaven, that is kind of stinks anyway when you look at the chart. But then when you analyze the power of the planets, you see that Saturn, normally known as the major malefic, is extremely powerful and extremely discordant or negative in this chart. It just shouts out at you, dirty business. Dirty business. You know what? Scandal, scam.
Guess who I'm convinced that that Saturn is a symbol for in this chart. It begins. I'll give you one guess. It begins with a federal and ends with a reserve.
Mm-hmm.
Saturn is going to be.
Hey, we have to do a show on the Federal Reserve. That's if we don't get assassinated first. I just want to say to you, Stephen and I, to all our listeners, Stephen and I are very excited about this show, and we're very committed to it for the long term. And we plan to do this show for maybe 20, 30 years. So if it suddenly ends, do look us up. Do try and book a consultation just to check if we took a bullet for the team, or keep an eye on us. We need you. So, so we need you to spread the word about our show just to help keep us safe. Because we're looking at some really risky stuff here. We had this show about Putin, and I have to say, Stephen, not that I'm saying we're wonderful, but we are. but we said, didn't we, that the situation with the Ukraine would kind of stink for a while. It would get difficult on and off, but we said that Russia would it wouldn't be an enormous ordeal for Russia. And I've had such a crazy week that I haven't followed the news as well as I normally do, but I did spot earlier this afternoon that Putin had said we will respect the presidential election in the Ukraine, and I thought, oh, that's good of you. Nice, thanks for that. And they've also done a $400 billion deal with China. Yeah. Now, you and I said, I can't remember whether we said it on our show or we said it in one of our private discussions that are fascinating, by the way. Everyone, you should listen to them. Good. But we said, didn't we, Russia and China talking to each other. There's stuff going on, and it did. It hit the news. They've done this enormous oil deal that goes on for years and years. But anyway, I sidetracked a little bit there to brag about our prediction on.
No, it's fine. In fact, let's just hope that one of these days you're not going to come on the show and be like, well, got some bad news. Stephen died in a quote unquote hunting accident.
I got somebody hunting me this week actually, but that's another story. Well, why my week's been stressful. I think, and you know what I was saying though, Stephen? I was talking with my colleague Nancy. She's an amazing business partner, amazing friend, and we really came under attack. And we were talking about it from different perspectives on different, how do you look at this on different levels? Right. And we came to the conclusion that, when you work with the light, you're trying to bring light to people. So if you think of when you work with your clients, you're trying to shed light on who they are, their greatest opportunities, their talents, on the good in the world. You're trying to help people. You're trying to increase the light. So by nature of that, you are a force against darkness. And just occasionally, I don't know if you found this, but occasionally I find that, darkness never gets right up in my face, but it tries to get close through a third party, and you really have to watch out for that. But I'm very much rambling this evening. Is this? Can I just get a reading?
Sure, no problem.
Just cancel Kelly or whoever she was. We are on break, right, Stephen?
I've got my tarot cards right here, but
I need it. It's been a bit of a week, but it's okay. We'll be fine. We got the Empress card as the outcome, so we know what you could. We asked how will this turn out for us, and we got the Empress card, which is wonderful. But hey,
it is.
Steve, I wanted to just ramble a little bit more about a couple of things I spotted in this chart and see what you think of them. Okay. So, Steve, when you look, you eyeball that grotty, mean, nasty Saturn in this NYSE chart. You just want to get your boxing glove out and smack it. Well, Uranus is in Aries. Transiting Uranus is in Aries, 15 degrees. And, in a number of years, it will get to 25 degrees Aries, so it'll be conjunct Saturn, and that's not going to be a happy combination.
Look at that. Let's look at that ascendant all of a sudden, because Uranus is in the ascendant, and it's only with great strength that I resisted the urge to say Uranus is in the ascendant. Okay, Uranus is in the ascendant. Uranus is in the ascendant. But the ascendant is Leonine. It's Leo. With the Leo ascendant, the primary motivation here for the New York Stock Exchange is to dominate. Okay, think about that. Think about all of these entities that got government bailouts. Okay, all these government bailouts. This is a result of that Leonine ascendant. We are all dominant.
Stephen, though, I was thinking the other day, if they hadn't got that bailout, what kind of tax rebate would we each have got? Isn't it something stupid like $10,000? We all would have got a new car or something if we hadn't done those stupid bailouts. Yeah,
and the worst part is that the government is always forcing us to feel guilty about maybe not carrying our fair share or not paying our fair share. But the fact is, with the New York Stock Exchange's ascendant in Leo, it's going to dominate others. And in this case, others, it ain't you and me, okay? The peer, the only peer that's comparable to the New York Stock Exchange is the federal government of the United States of America. So, Washington, the White House, they're complete sycophants when it comes to the New York Stock Exchange. They're cream puffs. They get down on their knees and they kiss the stock exchange's ass every single day. And it makes me sick to my stomach because there are hardworking Americans.
Oh, Stephen, listen, Stephen. It's our show. You can be honest.
Oh yeah, sure. I'm always.
Let it rip.
Yeah, and it really makes me angry because the people who suffer from the machinations of this organization, the New York Stock Exchange, are people who probably don't know any better, people who don't have any money in the stock market, people who don't have enough money to invest, people who can't rub two nickels together, people who work, who earn their bread from the sweat of their brow. And these people are grist for the New York Stock Exchange meal. It makes me sick to my stomach. It disgusts me. And the reason it does that is because our government bends over back. Our government is incredibly sycophantic to the New York Stock Exchange. My heart is very, very, very much with the working class, blue-collar person. And these people are not invited to participate in the thing that is the New York Stock Exchange. In fact, what the blue-collar person has to do is to use his tax funds to bail out these prostitutes, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, all of these, the GM, the banks, all of these huge corporations. All of a sudden, they're like somebody standing in front of Walmart with a "we'll work for food." Don't expect me to believe that for one single second. Not at all. Not at all. Those people can go to hell as far as I'm concerned. Now it's time for the common man to have his day. But that's a different topic.
Stephen, I was talking with a couple of very dear friends the other day, and I said, maybe we should buy a piece of land. Let's get 20 acres or even just 10 acres, and let's build a house. A little eco-friendly, off-the-grid house, and let's have a vegetable patch that we manage together, and flowers that we grow, and this, that, and the other, and solar panels, and let's create our own little decent world.
Oh,
our own little oasis.
I'm from North Carolina, man. I garden, I grow my food, I kill it and butcher it and eat it. You know what I'm saying? I don't need the stock exchange. They can go to hell. But with that said, I don't want to give the impression that I'm against capitalism, that I'm against the stock exchange per se. What I'm against are the very cunning and immoral manipulations of economics and market principles so that would permit someone to come up with something as lofty as a credit default swap. Who the hell knows what a credit default swap is? Yet, because of financial products such as this country is in the economic straits that it's in today. No.
Hey,
yes.
Stephen, you know what I just spotted? I was thinking of that, the nodal axis, and the fact that the part of fortune squares it, and I was thinking it's almost like, our gain is your loss. No, it's not. In fact, is it a square? 1, 2. It's not a square. It's a sextile and a trine, isn't it?
What, with the sun?
No, if you look at the part of fortune and the nodal axis, it's 1, 2. No, it is 3. But it is in the bends, and it is like your loss is my gain.
Yeah.
And actually, the progressed sun is in opposition to the part of fortune. It has been for a couple of years, or three or 4 years. Probably around the time it progressed into opposition was around the time of the collapse in 2008. I want to ask you, Stephen. We talked a little bit about the very powerful eclipse in 2020.
Right.
So just for everybody's reference, we have generally 4 eclipses a year, and they differ in power, they differ in meaning, and therefore in impact. So you have to look at the context. And I always say to students of astrology, context. Look at, really dig deep. It's like going down the rabbit hole. You find so much, and it's never ending. But when you look at eclipses, the 9/11 eclipse, the eclipse that preceded 9/11, I should say, was more powerful than any eclipse in the 20th century.
All right.
And the next very, very powerful eclipse is 2020, that sensitive time that we're researching. And it's not quite as powerful as the 9/11 eclipse, but it's extremely powerful. And again, it's more powerful than any eclipse in 2020.
Right.
So I wanted us just to plot that, Stephen, and talk a little bit about what we feel that means for the New York Stock Exchange. So I've got the date of the eclipse here, actually, for everybody's reference. So this powerful 2020 eclipse is on June 21st.
Right.
It's 2:41 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time.
That's why I said that, this is going to be during the sun's period of the Firdaria. And so, this is also when, during that same sun period, we're going to have the Pluto return, which is going to have a distinct financial tang to it. Now,
that's that US Pluto return. Now, I'm losing track. We have not done a show yet on the US outlook, have we?
No. Maybe we'll do that next week. You want to do that next week?
I'm tempted because, as you said, Pluto return, that's just enormous. What is it? Pluto goes around the zodiac once in every 250 or 260 years.
Yeah.
That's huge. It's huge. And before it returns, it's going to hobble its way over the South Node, that very malefic black hole in the US chart, and it's in the House of Finances. So interesting times. So I agree with you. Yes, we said we weren't sure what we would do next week. Let's do the US chart. Maybe we do two shows. We do one on the US chart, the nature of the entity, and then we do another show on the future.
That's perfect. Yeah, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. We can definitely do that. I want to point out that when Pluto returns to conjunct his natal position in the American birth figure, it's going to be in the 6th house of illness and the New York Stock Exchange birth figure. Okay, 20. I want to.
Okay.
Where we at here?
Part of the sickness that reveals itself.
Yeah, it's going to be financial in nature. But however, remember, just because with this chart, the thing that's funny is that what's good for the New York Stock Exchange is not necessarily good for the investors. You see what I mean? And so, even though there's going to be widespread financial confusion and probably some devaluation of a lot of corporate properties, the New York Stock Exchange itself and its owners, they're obviously going to survive because guys like that always do. Even in a famine, they're going to be vultures who eat. Huh?
Yeah, well, Stephen, I tell you, absolute shocker. You know this, but for those of you that haven't ever considered this powerful eclipse in T20, did I say it was? I'm looking at my screen seeing, yes, June 21st, 2020. Brace yourselves. It's at 0 degrees Cancer. Cancer is a cardinal sign, very, very impactful sign of the zodiac. So cardinal is initiating, things happen. And 0 degrees of a cardinal sign is huge, really, really impactful. If you remember, we were saying before that the nodal axis in the New York Stock Exchange chart is at 0 degrees Aries, cardinal fire sign, and the North Node is 0 degrees Libra, cardinal air sign, and the eclipse, that powerful eclipse in 2020, which is more powerful than any eclipse in the 20th century, will be at 0 degrees Cancer in the bends, squaring the nodal axis, and in opposition to the progressed sun. The shit will hit the fan.
Yeah,
shit will hit the fan. What else could that mean, Stephen? What do you think?
It's hard to say right now, quite frankly. It is hard to say. I think what it'll represent in terms of, and what signs are the eclipse? Is the eclipse happening in again?
The eclipse, Stephen, it's a 0 degree eclipse.
Oh yeah,
0 degrees Cancer. So it's just an eclipse at 0 degrees of a cardinal sign. It's very rare and it's very powerful, and it's very powerful for various other reasons. We should do a whole show on eclipses at some point. But squaring the nodal axis in this chart, that's just horrid.
It's going to hurt the moon because, the moon rules Cancer, and so the moon's going to be affected by this, and the moon are the people. Now, it's not just the moon as the people, but, Cancer is a domestic sign. It's going to hurt people's families. It's going to hurt people's houses. You're not going to have as much money for groceries during that. You're not going to have as much money to do home repairs for that. The housing market is going to, it's going to affect anything. It's going to affect household budgets. And even
Stephen, do you know what I think though? When I see you look at the stock exchange and you see all of the growth that we've had. So we had that horrible collapse in 2008, and we've had all this growth, and it's been motoring away. Oh, all wonderful again. Life's good, and the unemployment figures in the US are coming down. But then you've got nations like Portugal and Spain and Greece absolutely on their knees, and then chaos in other areas, and hideous wars in Africa and the Middle East, and goodness knows what going on. But the stock exchange is doing well, and the unemployment figures in the US have come down. But are those people fully employed? Are they well paid? Have they got a retirement scheme? Are they living with their parents? Are they in some awful property? I was speaking with a wonderful lady the other day she lost her business, and she said that she's living in a property that the rats are so big her cats are scared of them. So it's not real. It's not real. There's no way the growth in the market since 2008 is real. We've just printed cash. We've pumped cash out, and it's not real.
What I want to point out
by anything.
This is a collusion between New York Stock Exchange, its owners, and its backers, and the federal government of the United States of America. There's a collusion between these entities. Therefore, the inflation, but because the government, obviously, the administration, any presidential administration, I'm not singling out President Obama, any presidential administration, it's natural that you want the market to perform well under your tenure, no? So there's this sickening and there's this collusion between the government and the financial movers and shakers in this country, and the result of this have been the proliferation of financial instruments that have caused inflation to skyrocket. I mean, skyrocket. And this is a huge problem. This is an inflation that did not have to occur. It's an engineered inflation that has been brought about by this cooperation between the New York Stock Exchange's owners and its financial backers and the federal government of the United States of America. And you're exactly right. There is no such thing as value. Now, we live in a time, in an era, where with such odious concepts as planned obsolescence, where it's actually cheaper or more profitable and lucrative for a company to craft a product that will screw up, that will fail prematurely. If we live in this, I'm not even sure if this is the sort of world I want to live in. There's no quality anymore. Your paper currency is becoming more and more debauched by the day. And really, these people up in Wall Street and Washington are practicing economic sodomy on the people of the United States of America, and inflation is going to continue to skyrocket until finally it could even possibly be like Weimar Germany, where you had to...
Well, we never learn. We never learn.
No, because
at least if you think of animals, they do learn. If I look at my cat, I have a cat. I have 3 cats, Stephen. I did have 6, but I have 3 at the moment. And one of them, when he wants to go out, he scratches the door, and he did quite a lot of damage to the door. And I've taught him positively, I haven't hit him or anything, but I've taught him positively that he doesn't need to do that he can go out when he wants to go out, as long as it's not raining, and if he does it the right way, he's rewarded. He gets what he wants, and he's rewarded. There's a way of achieving the result you want to achieve that doesn't cause damage, that doesn't cause harm to others.
Yeah, well, you remember, Steve.
But humans don't learn. The human race doesn't learn. The cat learns.
There's a lack of water in this chart. The people who are running the New York Stock Exchange, they don't care about that. You know what I mean? They don't care about that at all. What they care about is their own material comfort. Then, that's all they care about. So there's no emotion for this sort of thing. And I want to point out to people that this is not a modern phenomenon. Let's go back to 10th grade when you guys were playing pocket pool or daydreaming in class. Your 10th grade world history teacher may have taught you guys something about something called the Hanseatic League. You know what I mean? This is essentially a new world order sort of financial cabal, that existed in medieval Europe. So stock exchanges, bourses as they're called, that's the name for it. It's a bourse. It comes to us from Bruges, Belgium. That's what they were called. It was called the bourse from the guy who started it. Stock exchanges have been around since antiquity. Even the ancient Romans on the Capitoline Hill, they had a sort of a stock exchange there, believe it or not. And so misbehavior, malfeasance with these things It's been going on throughout history. I would refer you to the tulip mania event in 1636 in Holland, where this cabal of corporate whoremongers drove up the cost of tulip bulbs in Holland until the point where the prices just bottomed out and collapsed on October the 1st in 1636. And this, so we have various bubble types of economics going back into the deepest part of antiquity. This is nothing new. And just like, I'm fond of saying God is going to keep flunking you until you fail the course, and it's going to be the same thing with we humans. If we don't learn how to deal with financial cabals such as the Hanseatic League, such as the Bilderberg Group, and other odious. Let me just stop. I don't want to get all riled up here. But if we don't, I
was hoping we would have a year of shows.
Yeah,
getting shot.
Yeah, I don't. If I keep it up,
it looks like it might be a week today.
Yeah, but my point is that these financial cabals have been documented and have existed for all of history, and if we don't eventually nip them in the bud, we're going to suffer consequences. Communism is a reaction to this sort of thing, and communism is no sort of answer. Look how screwed up it is.
Well, you know that there is a theory, there is a conspiracy theory that there is a network of groups around the world. I think they're called the Global Alliance or the something Alliance.
Yeah.
And there's a theory that organization deliberately engineered the 2008 market collapse in order to put the bigwigs out of business. In other words, the people that hoard control, Illuminati, whatever you want to call them, put them out of business, cause them so much financial damage that they go out of business. But I'm not saying that this is true. I'm saying it's a conspiracy theory. I read about it and I thought, how interesting. But apparently, the other part of the theory is they never imagined, they didn't anticipate that governments would bail out these problematic institutions. So it backfired.
Yeah.
But then you think to yourself, well, who controls governments? I don't believe that we do. I think that we're humoured with a voting process that makes us feel like we have some control.
Yeah, and the president certainly doesn't control anything. He can barely, at any rate. No, what I want to point out here is that if this is where there's smoke, there's fire phenomenon, it hardly even matters whether the theory is true or not, because, in fact, the financial malfeasance of 2008 it could be nothing other than intentional, could it? I interpret it as a completely voluntary, purposeful, intentional sabotage of the American economy by greedy people. It's
global economy.
Well,
I know what breaks my heart, Stephen. You know what breaks my heart though is when there's a collapse like that, when we really suffer economically. The people that really suffer are the people that no longer are receiving sufficient charitable donations in developing nations in the third world. Because what happens is everybody cuts back and there's an enormous reduction in aid to people that really need assistance, charitable organizations, basically, helping people in Africa, creating water wells and sending kids to school, etc., etc.
Now, all of this,
and that's where it really hurts, and we don't really talk about that, and we don't really notice, do we? We're just shopping.
As far as I'm concerned, this is symbolized in the New York Stock Exchange's chart by Uranus in the first house in a very wide opposition to Pluto. I mean, they're probably not in orb, but they're in opposition by house. You know what I mean? Pluto's in the second house.
They're in exact opposition now. And that actually they're in exact opposition now, and I've just spotted you've caused me to spot something I hadn't spotted about the progress chart. So we said that the natal Pluto is at 23 degrees Aquarius. It squares, which is a challenge, an obstacle, an exact square to natal Mercury. In other words, if it was your friend, don't listen to everything that they say.
Right. They're not entirely honest. What I want.
But let me say, Stephen,
sure.
Now progressed Uranus, which we said is in opposition to natal Pluto, that progressed Uranus is now squaring Mercury as well.
Sure.
So right now, your friend is really not worth listening to.
No, it's not. I mean, the way I see this is that Uranus represents what I refer to as the sort of economic sodomy of the American people. Uranus represents this invention with the science of finance, coming up with derivatives, coming up with credit default swaps, coming up with subprime mortgage loans. This is Uranus. These are new things. These are innovations. And it's in opposition to the people, Pluto in Aquarius. These are the people in the third world who probably see maybe $100 of American currency a year, if that. These are the people who don't have electricity. This is Pluto in Aquarius. Okay, and Uranus is completely opposed. So Uranus is going to completely bollocks that Pluto in Aquarius. And Mercury, that lying, combust, dishonest, thieving Mercury in the 10th house, is going to facilitate the entire process. It's a shame. There's no spiritual merit to what's going on here. Now, I mean, again, if I had money to invest in the stock market, I probably would. I don't think stock exchanges are not inherently evil. It's this Uranian manipulation of the science of finance that causes global tumult, global poverty, global unrest. And, a side effect of this is that the American people and across the globe, we're losing the idea of what value is at all. Some of the more extreme conspiracy theorists say that America really screwed up when it went off the gold standard, and that the paper currency, they always quote the idea of the fractional reserve banking, where and this is an example of a collusion and cooperation between Saturn, the government, and the financial institutions of America. The fractional reserve banking is sort of what allows this inflation to take place. Because if a bank loans me $1,000, it only has to have legally $100 in liquid funds inside that bank. So it's
just loaned incessantly, isn't it?
Yeah,
you put $100 on your account, and it's loaned to God knows how many
what I'm saying
individuals. So if you want it back, nearly everyone's got a problem.
No, what I'm saying is, I go in there. Let's say you're the banker and you loan me $1,000. According to the law, you only have to have $100 in liquid funds, and so you've essentially minted $900. You've created it out of nothing. It exists electronically now, and this is sort of the dynamic, according to the conspiracy theorists, that's under sort of fueling the inflation. But I tell you what, we've got another fascinating chart to talk about here tonight.
We have.
And we want to get to that before we run out of time.
Am I going to get my reading now then? Is that what
I'm afraid not. I'm going to refer to her as Nata K. She knows who she is, and she submitted her birth data for us to analyze, and her chart can also be found in the Metaphysical Media Study Group. It's rendered totally anonymous. But if she is listening, what we have here, as far as I'm concerned, is the chart of someone who can possibly be a consultant one day. And the reason I say this is because of her packed third house with the Sun in Capricorn, Mercury in Capricorn, and also the midheaven in Cancer. The midheaven in Cancer, this is a very nurturing type of energy that wants to take care of people. So I'm thinking perhaps she could have success as a consultant in some sort of nurturing type of field, a healthcare consultant, a catering or a food service industry type of consultant, or working in some sort of industry where there might be some nurturing or care going on. This is backed up by her ascendant in Libra, which is going to emphasize relationships. Her moon is there in the first house. This is further testimony for relationship, and that's what I'm really getting from Nata K's chart. I think that I expect her to do fairly well financially in her life. She's a young lady, born in 1994. I would expect her to do financially well once she gets her Jupiter in line. Jupiter is in Sagittarius, which is a great place for Jupiter, in the second house of her finances. This is usually a boon. However, until she matures, I would expect that Jupiter to represent perhaps some overspending. You know what I mean? Jupiter is going to spend a lot of the finances to create the houses that he rules, which are the third and the sixth. So there's a lot of spending on local journeys, spending on neighbors and siblings, spending on educational materials, spending on consultations herself, getting consultations, spending on sixth house things like, skills, things to improve her skills, or maybe even just spending, overspending. But other than that, Jupiter usually is a very, very good presence to have in the second house, and Venus definitely is a good presence to have in the second house. And she has Pluto there as well, so I would expect finances to be quite important to her. The people that she's going to be around are also going to be fairly wealthy because the eighth house of other people's money is in Taurus. Which is great. She's going to be, she's going to be surrounded by fine things. The eighth house is also, it represents your clients' money too, and you can't make any money if your clients don't have it to make in the first place. So I have reasons to believe that if she did go into a consulting sort of a field, then she would fare very well doing that. Look at Mars in the 11th house. Her Mars is actually very similar to the New York Stock Exchange's Mars because it's in Virgo. And it's in the 11th house, and this is something people don't realize about the 11th house, Steve, is that it is significantly mercantile and financial in its scope. Okay, the 11th house is a financial house, not just the second, not just the eighth, because the 11th house is the second house away from the 10th. Isn't it? It represents the wages of the job, doesn't it? If the 10th house is the career, the 11th house is the money derived from that career. So the 11th house represents the money that you make. The second house represents how much of it you get to keep, you see. Anything stick out at you about this chart, Steve?
Yeah, a lot.
Okay.
You know, Stephen, I can see the potential in this person, and whenever we look at a chart, it's really important that we identify potential and we help the person understand how much potential they have. So I agree with you that she can do very well in life, and she can do very well financially. And I do see a management and consulting theme as well, so I concur with that. I think what I would also say is that there's a lot of work for her to do. I feel that there are things that she really needs to master in order to realize her potential. Now, that's true of all of us, but I think that it's particularly the case for this person because I would say that she's had quite an unusual family life or upbringing, and particularly if I had to place a bet on it, I would say that she's had some significant challenges associated with a female role model. Usually it's the mother, but it may not be the mother, and sometimes it's the fact that a person didn't have a mother figure, that the mother wasn't really present or wasn't able to nurture. So I feel that she has some quite challenging dynamics when it comes to the feminine archetype.
I agree.
That's the mother, yeah, and I think that when it comes to business, she will need to, business or career, she'll need to be very discerning about the people she does business with. So if she were to go into business with somebody, then I'd want her to think very, very carefully about that person. And particularly, I wouldn't be overly positive about wonderful relationships with women in her business or her career. So I feel like she's got to be careful with that, because yes, she's got great potential to make good money, wonderful money, but she also has to be very, very discerning.
Right.
Now, the other things I would say are although she could do very well financially, I think that she's got to be very cautious about other people's finances. In other words, she may find in life that she can't rely upon other people's financial management. So she's young, but when she's older, if she's married or she has a partner, I would say that there's this potential for her to be doing well financially, but for the partner to be draining her financially, or perhaps not bringing in money or not making the effort required. So it seems to me that she's got to be careful with finances, even though there is a great potential. So again, in relationships or business partnerships, being very discerning, thinking about whether the person she might be in a relationship with, might marry or might form a business with, whether that person is really going to be responsible financially, or whether they could in fact be a real drain on her resources. These are some of the things that strike me initially as I look at this chart. I know that she has a very strong desire for balance. I feel that she's experienced quite a bit of imbalance in her family life, her upbringing, possibly with the mother, probably with the mother or a female, and it may be absence of that person, as I said before. So she has this deep underlying desire for harmony and balance,
right.
but it doesn't come easily to her. And that can cause her to overly compensate in relationships.
Yeah.
So it could cause her to try and do too much to provide balance and not necessarily see that or get that from a partner. Now, again, it doesn't mean that all of these things become so. I've seen people who do a lot of spiritual work, who do a lot of self-mastery, overcome challenges like this. Let's face it, we've all got challenges in our charts. That's why we're here on the earth plane, learning more. And if that wasn't the case, we'd be on the angelic plane. We'd be just guiding the world,
right,
or trying to guide this crazy world. So those are some of the initial things I see, Stephen.
I would have to agree. Sometimes it's hard to assign houses to mom and dad. You know what I mean? Sometimes mom can go to the 10th house. Sometimes mom goes to the 4th house. And it really all depends on which parent is the nurturing one and which parent is the rule maker, the disciplinarian, okay? And with Cancer on the 10th house cusp and the moon in the 1st house, this would indicate perhaps that the mother should be assigned to house number 10. Okay, and also Nata K was born at night. This is a nocturnal birth figure. So in most night charts, Saturn is the father. Saturn is a symbol for the dad. And the 4th house is actually in Capricorn. The 4th house, therefore, I would judge as being the house of the father. And in that regard, I would say that the father perhaps could be the nurturing one. Perhaps the father would be the source of love, and maybe mom might be the disciplinarian. The moon is in Libra, which is a sign of dealing, of relationship. Perhaps there were other siblings that, where mom had to split the nurturing among the siblings, or something of that nature. I'm thinking that most of the emotional nurturing may have come from the father. Now, interestingly enough, Mars is in opposition to Saturn, and Mars rules her 7th house of relationships. Therefore, Mars might be a pretty strong symbol of her typical sort of partner, Mars in Virgo. And Mars in Virgo, as far as I'm concerned, is the symbol of the investigator, the detective, sort of a thing. So, but without doubt, Mars is a strife, a wrathful sort of energy. So that's sort of what I would expect for her from the romantic life, from the partner. And that would be something to deal with. Mars being in opposition to Saturn. That also could be quite problematic for her, especially considering that Saturn is in the 5th house. Now, the 5th house has to do with creative self-expression. It has to do with the way that you have fun, how you express yourself through fun. Children are also associated with the 5th house because they are indeed a form of self-expression. You express yourself through your kids, and also for that reason. Enterprise, your business. This is also represented by the 5th house. If you start a business, this is a 5th house sort of thing. And so Saturn is in there. And I've seen a lot of my clients who've had this precise sort of signature with Saturn in the 5th house. Sometimes I see a lot of lack of self-confidence when it comes to love affairs or, romances. So a lack of self-confidence when it comes to starting another enterprise. And it could very well delay having children in general. And being in opposition to Mars, especially, that could represent inhibition and including inhibited anger. So I would expect Nata K perhaps to have a problem voicing her frustration, because the energies are so disciplined and concentrated in her and focused, which is great. This is the sort of person who can do painstaking, methodical work. Do you see? But it's also associated with the father. However, this does not necessarily mean a good relationship with father. In fact, with the opposition between Mars and Saturn, I would expect, unfortunately, quite the opposite. I would expect the relationship with dad to be kind of difficult, even though dad could be the nurturing one. Mom, however, might be the one to keep it together, and that could be why mother, as a symbol of femininity, is inadequate here in this chart, because mom may actually had to have been the one who was the disciplinarian. So this actually speaks to an absent father, or if not absent, then ineffectual somehow. Saturn in the fifth house is, the fifth house is that rules places of amusement, taverns, bars, things like that, amusement parks, theaters, and this is where Saturn's at. You see, so maybe, and Saturn, I just said, is in nocturnal charts is a natural symbol of the father, and so with Mars in opposition to that Saturn, I'm actually thinking there might be worse problems with dad than there are with mom. I think the problems with mom, Steve, result from mom having to take care of dad's. Maybe I'm thinking mom has to cover for dad.
Yeah, you may be right. It may be that the mother's circumstances are very challenging, or have been very, very challenging. It could be that the mother is emasculated in some way, and so I concur with you that's certainly a possibility.
Well, I mentioned that the 10th house. I mean, it's hard to determine. Sometimes the father can go to the 4th house. Sometimes the father goes to the 10th, and likewise with the mother. The answer, the way that I usually do it, is to determine which parent was the rule maker, the disciplinarian, and which parent is more of the nurturer. And it's not necessarily going to be mom being the nurturer and dad being the rule maker. In this particular chart, in Nata K's chart, with Cancer on the midheaven, I'm showing mom as being the nurturer, especially with moon, which is a symbol for females, a symbol for mom, with the moon being in the 1st house. Mom was definitely a disciplinarian. She may have been too strict on Nata K. I think father being in the 5th house, Saturn in the 5th. I think dad was really kind of having some fun. So I think
should we take a look at what's going on in her life now, or what the outlook is?
Yeah, sure. Outlook.
Yeah, let's see what we feel is going on at the moment. I can see that she's at that time of life when finances are not necessarily wonderful.
Right. They're going to get better.
Yeah, so I'd say that she hasn't got lots of material resources at the current time, and any money that is coming her way, she's working very hard for it. But I don't feel that her life right now is about money.
No. I don't either. Right, she's about to enter one of the most beautiful parts of one of the most beautiful periods of life, Steve, the Jupiter Fyodor. And on her birthday in this year, she's going to enter into a 12-year period that's ruled by Jupiter. And for us who are born at night, it always happens about the same age. The sequence is a little bit different for those born in the daytime. But usually what this means when people enter into the Jupiter Fyodor, it usually means things like travel, and abundance and happiness and joy. This is just in general. But in her chart, Jupiter is financially oriented. It's in the 2nd house. It rules the 3rd house, and it also rules the 6th house. So I expect the Jupiter Fyodor, the Jupiter period, to be a time of commensurate professional achievement during this time. I really expect her to get her professional life started during the Jupiter period. I really do. And following that is the Saturn period, beginning on her birthday in 2026 and going up until 2032. This will also be a period of wealth for her because Saturn is in the 11th house. And this means, I'm sorry, not Saturn, Mars. Mars is in Virgo in the 11th house. And during this Mars period from December 27, 2026 to her birthday in 2032, I expect it to be a period where also she earns well. I expect her earnings to be good during that time. Her 2nd house ruler, in fact, is Mars. So He's going to put money in her pocket then.
I feel that, Stephen, when I look back a little bit, I feel like 2013 was probably pretty challenging for her. I feel like the last 12 months have been generally quite a really transformational time, but almost a tug of war transformation. You know, where you make great progress, but it's not like it just lands in your lap. You really have to deal with issues, and I feel that it's quite likely that this person has had some challenges in a relationship. Last quarter of 2013, but particularly earlier in the year. But I think it's very, very important that she understands that when we do experience such challenges in a relationship, if it's a separation, for example, or a disappointment, it's just that it's not meant to be. And that we, although it hurts like hell at the time, and it takes a while to get over it, when something wonderful happens, when we meet the person that's just right, we understand why the universe didn't keep us in that relationship or that dynamic. So I want to just say to her that she, although it was probably quite challenging, she should move forward. There are good times ahead, as you said. Mm-hmm. And it is a time of letting go and really embracing all the opportunity that's there. And I do concur with you that the next 12 months or so particularly are great for her career-wise or academically. So she really should focus on what gives her joy, the things that she really wants to be doing, and the objectives that she's working towards, and not necessarily staying focused, looking back at some of the challenges of 2013, early 2014.
Yeah, and looking at her Fiodaria, that period you mentioned, the final part of 2013, and even before that, she's in during that period she entered into the Saturn Firdar in December of 2003, and it lasted 11 years. And that period you referenced was the Saturn Moon period. And this is generally tough for lots of us. Her Saturn is in the 5th house, so this is, you mentioned relationship issues. The 5th house is all about love affairs, and Saturn there would represent maybe a lack of confidence, something being taken away, slow developments, etc. Just, misfortune, bad luck in general. And combined with the Moon in Libra, I can understand why that would definitely be a tricky time for her, because, it would be an emotionally disappointing period, I would imagine. But seriously, for the next 20 years or so, the general character of the next 20 years ought to be really good. Now, I'm not saying that it's going, it's going to...
it's never a complete walk in the park, is it?
Right,
Life always brings things up. For that, again, we're here to grow, and we generally grow through the challenges or the obstacles that we have to overcome. But I do agree with you that she's entering generally a good period of her life.
Right.
So I feel that it really is time to feel excited, to be expansive, to really go after all of the opportunity.
Yeah, I agree, especially once we get into 2017, 2018. Then I would expect, her son to start getting involved. Now, her son she's got a 3rd house son. This makes me think writer, literary, and it's Sun in Capricorn.
Possibly.
Sun in Capricorn, I bet you she'd do great at writing technical sorts of things, or writing, business tracts, or writing for the corporate world, or just writing in any kind of writing. I would expect her to be great with literary things. This sort of behavior will probably really swing into full gear as we get into 2017, 2018, and she'll start getting some money from that around 2020, if not well before, and it'll just be it'll be a generally good time in total for her. Now, looking, to conclude my comments before we start talking about next week's show, I think everything we agreed, we're probably going to talk about America next week, Steve? Or
I think that's a good follow-on from New York Stock Exchange.
Okay.
Well, and then I'd like, Stephen, well, I don't actually, I think we should look at the US next week, but then after that, I'd like to look at maybe Syria or Israel and Palestine or Iran, something, or North Korea, something really, really fascinating and oddball.
Sure, that would absolutely be great. But I'd like to conclude my comments here for Nata K real quickly. And I'm going to use a technique that the Arabs used in the Middle Ages to forecast, and it's really fast, really economical, and it uses the triplicity rulers of a sign. Okay, so I'm going to divide her life into 3 parts. I don't care how long the periods are, really, but let's just say each period is going to be about 25 years long. So let's look at her relationships. She's born at night. Aries is on the 7th house cusp. So we've got Jupiter, the Sun, and Saturn. So from 0 to 25 is Jupiter. 25, and she's actually younger than 25, so she's still in the Jupiter period of her relationship life. Jupiter is succeeded in the sign that he rules, so she will have relationships during this first third of her life. Let's look at the aspects of Jupiter. Jupiter is squared by Mars. This is an affliction, so the relationship probably won't be good. Now let's look at the second third of her life, ruled by the Sun. This will go from 25 to right around 50. Sun is in Capricorn, trine to Mars, sextile to Saturn. This is much, but he's Caden. Anyway, much better chances for a satisfying relationship in the years 25 to 50. 50 to around the end of life, we have Saturn. And Saturn can also provide a decent relationship in those years. So she will have relationship. That's a good thing there. And that's really all I have to say on this one before we get started teasing the next week's show. Do you have any additional observations on this?
Just a couple of things. Again, I agree that there's plenty of opportunity, lots to look forward to. I feel that late 2018, 2019 is a period to really take advantage of some really wonderful career opportunities at that time. And that sounds like a little way from now, but it's not that far away. No. And I see really wonderful opportunities at that time. And again, like everybody, we should understand ourselves, and the chart, the natal astrology, describes who we are and tells us the work that we need to do to be our best, and also where to focus, what our challenges and what our opportunities are. And I just wanted to concur with you about the writing theme, potentially a journalism theme as well. Mm-hmm. But, very good.
Well, Nata K, I hope that this delineation maybe helped you out some. We really appreciate you sending in your birth data. We'd like to reiterate that, by all means, if you'd like us to go over your birth chart on the air, send us your birth data. And during a show when we do this sort of thing, we will absolutely look over your natal chart and go over it. If you'd like to call in and ask us questions, no problem. We'll definitely let you know well in advance before we'll talk about we'll send you an email to let you know before we start, before the show airs, that we're going to be doing your chart. We'll pop your chart up in the Metaphysical Media Group fan page, anonymously, of course, and it'll be fun. So, again, you can contact me at Stephen@thegingerpsychic.com. You can get hold of Stephen Frampton at inquiries@StephenFrampton.com. So, write us. We would love to hear from you. Obviously, also, you want to go visit StephenFrampton.com to get access to all sorts of training materials, blogs, and you'll be able to pick up his book, Thinking Completely Outside the Box. So go over there, follow his blog, and get involved with Steve. He'll be happy to see you. You can find me at thegingerpsychic.com. Got a lot of really interesting articles and blogs over there that's going to teach you a lot about analytical astrology, tarot, etc. But let's talk about next week. I guess we're going to do Uncle Sam. I've always wanted to say that. I'm going to do Uncle Sam.
Well, it's a fascinating chart. Well, I actually say chart. There are 3 or there are actually 4 charts for the US, aren't there?
They proliferate.
Yeah, they yeah. But and again, for everyone's reference, it's because there's conjecture about the time of day that the US was actually founded. I know that you favor the Sibley chart, Stephen, don't you? The one that has Sagittarius rising.
I do. That's my number 1, and then the Gemini rising chart is my number 2. I do not discount the Gemini chart.
Yeah, I like them both. So shall we agree then to use both of them?
Absolutely. Let's get to know who this thing is that's called America. We live here, for Christ's sake. This is our home. So it helps to know where we live, doesn't it? America has a definite personality. It has a definite destiny. And we as citizens have a right to know what that destiny is. Because knowing what the destiny is, Steve, we can take control of it, can't we?
Yes.
Or to some degree. To some degree, we can try at least. And we should try.
the way I always describe it, Stephen, I've probably said this before on the show, but the way I describe it to my clients is that the chart is very accurate in the way it foretells our life or our lives, a person's life, but you can really jump on the opportunity in the chart, really work it, and you can really reduce the challenges in the chart by understanding those challenges. So I think the chart is very accurate, but we have an enormous influence over the way things unfold. And again, for me, the key to that is self-mastery, metaphysical insight, etc.
You know, I've had some clients who've had problems with Uranus. You know, they, for whatever reason, they always engendered this eccentric, explosive sort of reaction from other people without even trying. And sure enough, you know, I look in their chart and they've got Uranus problems. And so, you know, some astrologers might say, well, you know, you just kind of stuck with that. Too bad. But there's a way for, you know, I advised her to embrace the Uranian energy in another way. You know, Uranus is weird and eccentric. You know, so I was like, if you can find a way to be weird and eccentric in your private life somehow, you know, then that would bleed off some of, you know, that would give Uranus a healthy way to express. So we have the option of giving a planetary energy a healthy way to express. You know, our options sometimes are more limited than other people's options are. You know, there's a karmic influence to all of this as well. But for sure, it's not as fatalistic as astrology might seem sometimes. Things aren't quite that fatalistic. I want to point out that our comments tonight on the New York Stock Exchange, these are not meant to prognosticate any kind of financial performance. In order for that to happen, we're going to have to talk about specific companies. Do you know what I mean? We'll be talking about the stock exchange, the New York Stock Exchange again, various other stock exchanges again, and we'll talk about their health. We'll do more forecasts about their health as a composite, as an index. However, individual companies, we're also going to talk about those too. Hello, Walmart. Hello, Apple.
We need to speak to an attorney as well, though, before doing that. And I'm not sure whether I'm serious or not in that comment, actually.
Yeah,
maybe we do.
You know, it's I've already thought about that, man, and you know what? I've got like this panel of lawyers that dwell inside of my head, and you know, they both work for opposite sides. I got prosecutors, I've got defense lawyers in there, and you know, I think we're safe.
Well, I think I don't know. My preference, Stephen, is when we look at an organization, a business, right. we look at it astrologically, we look at it metaphysically, and right. we can say, you know, we predict at this point in time there'll be some challenges in this organization, and it's likely to be, you know, a public relations problem or stock market, the stock price declines dramatically, or leadership issues, or you see what I mean? So that we're not.
Far from suing us, they should get down on their knees and thank us.
Well, there are organizations, you know, from your work, there are organizations that pay for metaphysical insight and make big decisions with metaphysical insight. And I feel that that's very exciting, because
so do I.
I think when we talk of metaphysics, most people think of an individual that goes and gets a reading, you know, crystal ball reading. But really, we know that the good metaphysical systems, when they are well used by people that understand them, they're extremely revealing and extremely accurate. And there are organizations that do consult metaphysicians. I know you've got clients, and I've got clients that do ask for insight about the business.
Oh, yeah.
One of the challenges I find with businesses, though, is that they generally don't have a record of the time that the organization was created, and also people often think it's when they established the entity, and it's not. And it's when the owners or the board actually agree the operating principles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are ways that, I mean, it's nice to have the accurate birth time, because with that accurate birth time, we can bring all 4 symbol systems into play on the analysis. But without the birth time, we've only, and I use that term loosely, I put it in quotes, we only have 3 symbol systems. But still, having 3 symbol systems, 3 hierarchies of symbols interacting with each other, this is still an extraordinarily potent method of analysis. So I don't think anything is totally lost by completely being without the birth time. It's something that we can definitely do. We can use midpoint. We can use the signs and the planets and other factors. We won't have houses, but we can still make some progress. We can still find a lot of things to say.
Yeah, you could. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think you can get an enormous amount of insight when you don't have the time, but it is better. It's preferable to have the time, and often people don't have a record of the time they created their entity. It should be done deliberately.
Yeah, when a hospital is going to get the message.
Well, I think I wasn't writing a blog, and your blogs, Stephen. I have. I could kick myself because I saw that you'd produced about 3 blogs since I'd last looked at your website, and I thought, I was rubbing my hands going, oh, great, there are new blogs. I sent them to Staples to be printed, but it's too late to collect them, and they close at 9. But my plan was to make a nice cup of Earl Grey and get into bed with my cats and enjoy your blogs. So for those of you that are listening, check out Stephen's blogs. They are amazingly high quality, absolutely gourmet blogs.
Wow.
They are, and your first one was crap, but I remember when you did your first blog, it said to me, hey, what did you do? And I said, well, you had some big stuff with this one, but no, honestly, I'm not being nice to you. They are, I only read the best stuff I can find, and when I get really excited, I'd like to have a little sound on my computer that says, bing, Stephen published a blog. So I can get it straight away. Like, great, cancel meetings. They're brilliant, Stephen. You should be very proud, and you must put them all together in a book. I mean, you've got many books already.
Man. I tell you, when I write a blog, I mean, the last blogs that I wrote, I've got this terrible insomnia, right? And I went to bed.
Do you really?
Yeah, I forced myself to go to bed at 4 o'clock in the morning, right? And I laid there for 3 hours. I lay in bed until the sun just started. My room got bright, and I'm like, I'm just not going to sleep. And so I I hate to say I woke up, but I rose out of bed, made myself some coffee, and I wrote some of those blogs. I think I wrote the immorality. I wrote the blog on tarot reversals and the priestess. I wrote the devastatrix, ice mask.
And you wrote Jack the Ripper.
I did that in a bout of insomnia. So I refuse to take Lunesta because I heard it gives you man tits. I'm not going to take man tits. I'd rather have insomnia than that. I'm not going to take
you know what, though? I used Lunesta for a while, and I was so glad to get off it.
Really? Did it screw up your dreams?
It didn't give me tits. But well, I felt that I wasn't processing my emotions. I felt like it was just suppressing what I truly felt, and I didn't feel like that was good. And also, you hear a lot of stories, and I did have that experience. Sometimes you just wake up in the night, and it's hypnotic, so you're hypnotized, and you wake up in the night, and you can cook up a whole load of food and eat it all and go back to bed, and you wake up in the morning, you don't even remember waking up, and you go into your kitchen, and it's a disaster. So you can do things like that and not realize what you did. So I was glad to get off it. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for having a bit of help when you need it, but that was when I was in the corporate world, and I was horribly stressed and overworked, and I had terrible insomnia.
I don't think a lot of these pharmaceuticals are good for people like us, Steve. Sensitive people who are receptive to other energies. I don't think medications are really all that great, man. I mean, I'm not trying to influence anybody. It's just, I live my life the way I see fit to live it, and I haven't taken any significant medication from the healthcare industry since I was in my 20s, man. And I'm 38 now. I haven't been to see a doctor for 15 years.
I think that there's a lot to be said for really looking after yourself. eating well, trying to sleep well, exercising, if we eat really, really well, I think that's half of the battle.
I'm just not really attached to my life. You know what I mean? I mean, I like my life. I love it, in fact. But I'm pretty convinced that I'm the beneficiary of this whole chain of existences. So I mean, I've just got this feeling of ennui, like ho hum. I've been here and I've done it, and just nothing is new, nothing new under the sun. So I've been through this before, so let's just go through it and get it over with, and I'll do it again and again ad infinitum. But you know what? We're coming back. We're coming to the last minute of our show. Just want to remind everybody, you can find Stephen Frampton at stephenframpton.com. Check out his book, Thinking Completely Outside the Box. You can find me at thegingerpsychic.com. We really appreciate you joining us this evening, and we'll see you next Friday. Steve, you have anything for us, buddy?
No, just wonderful show. Really enjoyed it as always, Stephen. Thanks to everyone for listening. Please tell other people about the show if you feel they'll benefit, and feel free to blast it out to the world on Facebook and however you like. We enjoy it, and we want to reach as many people as possible. Thank you, Stephen.
Hey, to you, my partner. I'll talk to you later, man. Good night, everyone. Bye.